people coming in. Welcome to the new people that have just arrived. We'll wait another 2 minutes, I would say, and we will start at 5 past. Still people joining, welcome. We are very happy to have you here to our second webinar of our series, Criminalizing Ecocide. Very happy to have Luise on board. The webinar today will be held in English. That's why I'm practicing my English a little bit, talking to you. And the last one, the first one was in English too, very interesting, speaking about the Paris Agreement, the recording you find on our YouTube channel as well. The recording from today will be there published as well in the couple of next days. And the upcoming webinar in 2 weeks will be in English as well. Very interesting about colonializing topics, very interesting topic. The ones that come after that, they will be in German, and then we'll have 1 or 2 in English at the end. So, having said that, I'd say we are going to start. Thanks again for your presence. I will talk a little bit, say a few words about our speaker today, Luise Kozlowski. She's a German and Polish citizen. She graduated in Berlin in 2019 and is now a legal trainee in Berlin. And in addition, she has a master in international law from the University of Oslo. She's been there, I think, since May 2020 and until autumn, when I'm not mistaken. The focus of her studies was a mixture of international, environmental, and criminal law, and her master's thesis dealt with ecocide. And very interesting to know, she was in direct contact with Christina Vogt. She's a very, very great and famous German professor. She's in Oslo, and she was one of the experts that drafted the legal definition of ecocide that was proposed by our foundation last year. So, Luise, thank you very much for being here with us. You will take us on a ride to the background and origins of the term of ecocide. And actually, your webinar was planned to be the first one, and unfortunately, you were not able to hold it in December. The more we are pleased to have you here today. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Wolf, for your introduction. Okay, let me first find my presentation. Can you all hear me, by the way? Is it all working? I don't see anyone say anything, so I hope so. Okay. Okay, let me try this presentation. Okay, just a second. Okay. So one more time, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for letting me speak here today. I'm very excited to do that actually. And thank you everyone who is here tonight, of course. I guess I will just begin. So today I will be speaking about the historic context and the facts of ecocide, and I will give a few examples and maybe also an outlook at the very end. I just want to stress that I will not be able to discuss every aspect of my presentation in detail, of course, as there's just not enough time for that. But if you have any questions at any time, just type them in the chat and we will try replying to those later. Okay, so at first, here's a brief outline of my presentation. I will start with the history, of course. Then we will go over to the need for a crime of ecocide. I will talk about the actus reus and mens rea. I will explain later what that means. And at the very end, I will speak about ecocide in context. Okay, so let us talk about the history of ecocide. However, first of all, the term itself needs to be understood. So the word ecocide consists of two elements of the words eco and cide. The first referring to the environment as such, and the second one deriving from the Latin word killing. So very roughly put, ecocide just means killing or the destruction of the environment. Humans had been causing environmental damages for as long as they probably exist. But the term itself has first been used in the early 1970s by Professor Arthur W. Galston in connection with the Vietnam War. That was at the Conference on War and National Responsibility in Washington, actually. Afterwards, different academics and legal scholars started arguing for a criminalization of ecocide. So in 1972, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, accused the USA of ecocide in Vietnam. Shortly after, in 1973, Richard A. Falk proposed an international convention on the crime of ecocide. And in 1978, a proposal was made to include the Ecocide and the Genocide Convention. Then we had another failed attempt. It was to include the crime of ecocide in the Code of Crimes Against the Peace and Security of Mankind. Today, this is known as the ICC or the Rome Statute. But you know, us humans, we never give up. So in 2017, Holly Higgins and Jojo Mehta established the Stop Ecocide Foundation. And why this is so important is because of the fact that they convened the independent expert panel, which on June 22nd in 2021 submitted the draft of the legal definition of ecocide to the criminal court. And that is what I want to look at today in a bit. But first, I want to discuss why there is a need for a crime of ecocide. There are a lot of reasons, in my opinion, and I could probably talk about it for hours. So that's why I try to focus on four major aspects only. First of all, we have climate change, of course. It's one of the biggest environmental issues we are facing nowadays. And I am sure you are constantly experiencing the effects of climate change, like, for example, those heat waves, especially the heat waves we're facing in Germany right now. Well, not right now, but in the summer. And you also know that the glaciers are melting, which are causing a sea level rise, and that we are facing a huge biodiversity loss all over the globe. So the legal instruments at hand to mitigate climate change are the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Although these legal instruments put obligations on states, they do not have an independent and effective enforcement mechanism. So we need international criminal law to address the individual and hold them accountable. The same actually applies to the deforestation of the Amazon, or just the deforestation in general. There is no effective international legal instrument to prevent further environmental harm from happening. Especially one state, in this case, Brazil, is responsible for the deforestation of the rainforest. And since they're a sovereign state, it is basically impossible to interfere. And yet we are facing a huge biodiversity loss, lower oxygen production, climate change, and rainfall mitigation, which affects not only Brazil, but all other countries as well. So you can also tell that this is closely interlinked with climate change. Another problem is water contamination. The contamination, or those microplastics that are floating around the water, they threaten the flora and the fauna of the oceans, rivers, lakes, and it also poses a risk of the Pacific people's livelihood and health. And what about indigenous peoples? They are the most vulnerable here, I would say. And by destroying the environment, we are violating their rights. And after all, they rely on raw materials and a clean and healthy environment. They're actually the ones which could teach us how to protect nature, but instead of learning from them, we destroy their living space. So there is this United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but it is only a soft law instrument, and it can also not be enforced. So to me, it seems like international criminal law is the next step in protecting the environment and also the indigenous people's rights. And this is where the legal definition of ecocide comes into play. So let's take a closer look at it. For all of you who don't know it, I put it in my presentation. And according to it, ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. I'm going to let that sink in for a second because maybe you need to read it again. And I just want everyone to follow me through the next steps as I will discuss the various terms. So I'll just give you 1 second. Okay, so just to have everyone on the same page, if this definition was adopted, ecocide would become the 5th international core crime, but that remains to be seen, of course. So as any other crime, the crime of ecocide consists of both an objective and subjective element, the actus reus and the mens rea. So the objective criterion requires for the act to be unlawful and also demands a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So it is basically all the terms listed below, as you can see on the presentation. The mens rea requires the act to be carried out with a certain state of mind. In that case of ecocide, the act must therefore be wanton or committed with knowledge. Next, I will explain the terms, but also an in-depth discussion would just not be possible today. But in case you want to know more about that, or you want to learn about these definitions, you can just go to the Stop Ecocide international website, and there you will find a draft of the definition and the official commentary. Okay, so let us start with the actus reus. So at first we have the term unlawful, and it is basically self-explanatory. It just means that the act is performed in violation of the law, and that can be either national or international law. The term severe is described as a damage which involves a serious adverse effect, and it includes not only grave impacts on human life or natural or economic resources, but also cultural resources. So this is a novelty in international criminal law, and this is especially of value for the indigenous community, of course. Next, we have the term widespread, and this term focuses on the geographical scope. But that does not mean that the damaging acts need to have a large geographical range. It is also sufficient if the damage is suffered by a large number of human beings. On the other hand, we have the term long-term, which has a temporal dimension. And this is assumed when the damage is basically irreversible. That also includes a damage which cannot naturally recover within a reasonable period of time. What is another novelty is the definition of environment in international law. The panel agreed on a very broad definition, which includes the Earth, the biosphere, cryosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere, of course, as well as outer space. So now let's move on to the mens rea requirements, which are a bit more tricky in my opinion. So, above all, it must be understood that the terms unlawful and wanton are mutually exclusive because the wantonness requires a lawful act. And wanton is defined as with reckless disregard for damage, which would be clearly excessive in relation to the social and economic benefits anticipated. That basically means that a proportionality test needs to be conducted, similar to the one in Article 8, paragraph 2A and B ICC statute. So this is not completely new in international criminal law. In that specific case of ecocide, the damage and the social and economic benefits must be weighed against each other. After all, only the most serious acts should be captured so that economic activities that are conducted in a sustainable manner are not affected. Next up, we have the term knowledge. And this term is not identical to the one in Article 30, paragraph 3 ICC statute, as there it means awareness that a circumstance exists or a consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events. The panel, however, decided to define it differently. The term knowledge is to be understood as recklessness or even dolus eventualis, the latter including the perpetrator's attitude towards the occurrence of a factual result which can range from indifference to reconciliation. It is sufficient that the perpetrator considers the occurrence of success possible. I guess this is easier to understand when you have a legal background in Germany, as this is a term that is very clearly defined in the German legal system. But I hope you're still following somehow. So what is missing, or what is new and what is missing? Let's start with the new things. So it is new that the crime is one that is not entirely anthropocentric in nature. That means that it doesn't just protect mankind as such. The crime can also be committed in times of peace and not just in times of armed conflict. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the statute so well, but all the other core crimes, they can only be committed in times of armed conflict. Also, this crime introduces a new type of mens rea requirement. This is just what we just talked about, the term knowledge. But what is missing? I think that's even more important. So we're missing a few definitions. We're missing a definition of recklessness, or with reckless disregard, a definition of dolus eventualis, because it hasn't been defined in international criminal law yet. And we don't know exactly what clearly excessive means in distinction to a mere excessive damage. And also, we do not have a list of acts. We do not have examples like, for example, in Article 7, the ICC statute, which is crimes against humanity. And also, we are still missing a provision on corporate responsibility. Let's talk about ecocide in context now. So this is basically my last point. Let's start with some general remarks. So I will not be talking about the ICC's jurisdiction and immunity, as this would go beyond the scope of this presentation. I will just assume throughout this whole presentation that the jurisdiction is given and that there's no immunity. And throughout this webinar, I will mostly focus on the substantive law. Okay, so let's talk about the Office of the Prosecutor, or just called OTP, and the judges of the ICC. About the prosecution. So the prosecution begins where the court's jurisdiction is or can be exercised. You can find that in Article 13 of the statute itself. The OTP investigates on their own. That's called the proprio motu referral, or when a situation is referred to by a state party or the United Nations Security Council. The OTP can invoke help from national authorities and other organizations since they don't have their own, basically. And if there is sufficient evidence at the very end, the OTP may request the pre-trial chamber to issue a warrant of arrest or a summons to appear. On the other hand, we have the judges, and they come from very different backgrounds and are experts in an area of international law in addition to international criminal law. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are experts in environmental law, which would be helpful when considering a crime of ecocide, of course. The judge's decisions solely must be based on the evidence admitted at trial. So it's up to prosecution what kind of evidence they present. And also the judges should, at least when considering a crime of ecocide, apply environmental law principles like the precautionary principle or the principle of sustainable development. So I picked one example of a potential ecocide, and I would like to go into a bit of detail when talking about the deforestation of the Amazon. And I will specifically look at the state of Brazil, so at this very part here. First, some key facts about Brazil. So I'm pretty sure you all know that, or you have seen it on the media. But since Bolsonaro has taken office in 2019, the deforestation of the rainforest has only been increasing. And a lot of endangered animal species are being harmed by logging and fires, and they are threatened with extinction. Also, we have an increase in CO2 emission rates by 10%, which is quite a lot. And I actually read a report that states that already 182 indigenous peoples were killed in 2020 when confronting their invaders. So an application of Article 7 ICC statute cannot be ruled out completely because of the harm that's being done to humans. However, this might not include the whole environment. So what if, hypothetically, the crime of ecocide, as proposed by the independent expert panel, already existed? Let's see if Bolsonaro could be held accountable if that were the case. I just want to say that this entire following part is, of course, purely hypothetical. And just for clarification, the international criminal law is not applicable retroactively. But in order to achieve a good prediction, the new legal definition must be applied to existing cases, of course. Okay, so if we assumed that all admissibility criteria were fulfilled, the court would first look into whether Bolsonaro was guilty of an act or an omission of a required act. As far as I am concerned, both are indisputably to be assumed. So among other things, the Environmental Department of Brazil has cut the funds of environmental agencies and institutes by approximately 30%, making it more difficult to implement environmental policies and counteract deforestation. Therefore, an act has been committed by the former president. He has also failed to prevent forest fires and illegal mining, so he can also be accused of an omission. So we actually have both things. Those acts must be unlawful or wanton, or unlawful and wanton. The mining of raw materials on protected indigenous territory is a violation of the Brazilian Penal Code. Related to this, it is an unlawful act. Now, with regard to the forest fires and the cutting of the trees, at least wantonness can be assumed, because if we do a proportionality test, it at first becomes evident that those projects are economically profitable for Brazil. However, by applying the principle of sustainable development, which is a principle from international environmental law, it becomes clear that deforestation is disproportionate. The downsides are just very, very severe. Cutting down the forest that stores around 123 tons of carbon contributes to global warming, and it impedes rainfall. So those acts also contribute to the extinction of certain animal species. So wantonness is given. With regard to the severity of those acts, reference can be made to what I've just said. But in addition to that, the terms widespread and long-term are present. So as it happens, the rainforest cannot be restored within a reasonable period of time, as it has been existing for millions of years, and the adverse impact the forest clearing would have on the global climate cannot be reversed quickly either. A bit problematic could be the proof of knowledge, because we do not know where Bolsonaro's head was at. But I would say that there is enough indications. There are cases against Bolsonaro that have already been filed with the ICC, and he was well aware of the situation in his country, as he has been confronted with it many, many times, even just by the media. In order to back this up, the prosecution can question individuals and NGOs and other organizations. Like, for example, there's this famous chief of the Kayapo people. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name correctly. It's Raoni Metuktir. I don't know. But they can question him, or they can question, for example, the Climate Observatory or Amazon Watch. And I would actually say this is more than enough to prove at least dolus eventualis. And all of that leads us to the conclusion that Bolsonaro could be charged with ecocide. But of course, there are many, many more examples of potential ecocide. I'm not saying they are punishable, but they could be seen as a crime of ecocide. So first of all, we have the very famous example of Shell, who's been emitting too much CO2. Or, for example, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The problem in those two cases is that we would have a problem with causation. And causation has to be discussed more in detail with the help of the precautionary principle. It needs to be proven that there is a causal link between the acts and the environmental damage. Further, we have, for example, the Athabasca oil sands in Canada, the nickel mines in the Swedish Arctic, the Rio Tinto's uranium dressing mine in Namibia, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which you're probably familiar with too. And what about the conflict in Ukraine? A few countries have already referred the case to the ICC, which means that states are thriving for justice, actually. But of course, it doesn't affect the crime of ecocide because it's not existent yet. But of particular concern is the targeting of nuclear power plants, which, should this be the case, would lead to an environmental catastrophe in the Ukraine, but also in other European countries. But you are all familiar with the Chernobyl case and of the impact it has had on Europe. So it is therefore very, very interesting to see how the situation will evolve in that context of an international ecocide crime, because although the proposed offense is applicable during peacetime, it must conversely be applicable during armed conflict as well. So now we have reached the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it at least a tiny bit. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, we will try answering them now.
Thank you very much, Luise. That was very, very well done, very good presentation. All the important and difficult aspects in such a short time was perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
And brilliant English as well.
Thank you. It's a bit rusty too.
You being Polish and German, you speak excellent English. So anybody here with immediate important questions, just unmute yourself. I hope that works. If not, please tell me in the chat if that's not possible. Könnt ihr euch unmuten? Do I have to unmute you?
Würde gehen, wenn ich was sagen wollte, würde es gehen.
Ah, wundervoll. Vielen Dank. Dann wissen wir, ihr könnt euch unmuten. Das ist schon mal super. Dankeschön. So since nearly everybody here is German, I think that is fine if you want to ask your question in German, but I continue English for the international listeners. There are a couple. And regarding our publishing of the webinar on our YouTube channel, I will stick to English. So if there are no questions, I would like to add some things from the German view, of course. since we are the German team organizing this webinar series, we have the German focus. The campaign is international. In way over 30 countries, there are teams. The headquarters is in the UK and the foundation is situated in the Netherlands. So if you want to donate, that is very welcome. I sent into the chat the link to our international petition. We would very much ask you to sign this petition if you haven't already done so. Most of you probably have. And if you have signed the petition, then afterwards you are asked to become an Earth protector. That is our way of calling the official members and supporters of our campaign. And then there are a couple of other ways to support us on our website, either German or international. I will put some links into the chat just now. Very important for us at the moment, I want to stress this, is in the European Union, the Environmental Crime Directive is under revision at the moment, and there is a historic chance to implement ecocides as a crime in the whole of the European Union. And we are campaigning for that and would ask you to sign our position paper. Link is following just now. So this is a very, very great chance if the crime of ecocide would be applied all over Europe. That would be the most important step to implement ecocide into the Rome Statute as well. That has been done already. So the crime of aggression has been introduced into the Rome Statute. So we know that this can be done. And very important to know that the idea of environmental crimes were already in the drafts of the Rome Statute, and they have been thrown out in the process of establishing the International Criminal Court in a very, well, you could say in a fishy way. So probably there was some kind of very hard lobbyism that worked in those days in the 90s to throw out the idea of environmental crimes. Just imagine what our world would look like if we had ecocide as an international crime against peace since 20 or 30 years. What would the world look like today? It would be very, very different. And with that, I would like to stress three things that we think are very important and why we focus on this criminal law. One is the personal relationship. So at the moment, companies are sued for environmental damage. They have to pay. Shell has been sued, and they have to pay lots of money. But in regards to all the profits they make, that doesn't keep them from not destroying the planet. So the very important thing is the personal relationship. So the people that are responsible for these decisions, if they know that they could be sued and could be put in jail for that, their decisions would be very different. The other thing is that the financial streams would immediately shift, because when things would be illegal, they couldn't be legally financed. And at the moment, billions and trillions of dollars are flowing into fossil fuel projects because the profits are so good there. And if those kinds of actions would be illegal, the legal financing would stop immediately. So all these cash streams would immediately search for new and more sustainable ways.
Wolf?
So this would have a great impact.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yes, of course.
I actually see some questions in the chat. We can maybe try replying to those questions if you want to.
Yeah.
I can just begin. So one of the questions is, what would happen after submitting the draft to the International Criminal Court? It's actually not that easy. It's a very, very lengthy process. It would have to be one state party to the ICC statute that would have to propose this amendment. Then they would have to vote, and only if 2/3 of the parties agree, we could have a hard law. And I think right now we have 123 parties to the Rome Statute, so we would need, I don't know, 2/3. How much is that? 80 something, 82 states. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure they would work on that definition and they would change it. So I'm pretty sure it would take around 7 to 10 years, maybe. I think it took as long with the crime of aggression. So it's, like I said, a very, very lengthy process. And then we have someone ask, first you have to try national court, and only when they say no, you can go to the International Criminal Court. Yeah, kind of. The International Criminal Court is a court of last resort. So yes, of course, you have to try national courts first. But if they are, for example, unwilling or unable to prosecute, then the International Criminal Court comes into play. But there are a few provisions on that in the Rome Statute. I can't tell you by heart which ones they are. I'm not that familiar with the statute. But I think it says exactly in which cases you can prosecute in front of the ICC. Yes. What else do we have? I don't know, Wolf, if you see any question you would like to, or you can answer, go ahead, of course.
I would like to say the third thing that I started in the beginning. So first is the personal responsibility. Second are the financial streams that can be altered immediately, and the third thing actually is moral awareness of our societies, because the criminal law is always the mirror of the moral definition of a society, or only the things that are really in criminal law. Those are the things that a society agrees on. What is not to be taken. So this is the third very important thing that we are focusing on, and we think when this crime of ecocide is in place, it will have huge effects on all the laws that are already there. Because one of the critics that we hear sometimes is that we don't need a new law. There are environmental laws nearly everywhere in the world, but they are not really strictly applied. And in a way, this is true. Nearly everywhere there are these laws, but unless we don't see the harm to nature as the most serious of crime, as long these laws will not be applied in the right way. And if you even look at the thing in German, it's called Verwaltungsaccessorität. I don't know the English term for this, but it means that the people in charge can grant companies to do things that are normally forbidden. So there, you are not allowed to put your waste into a river in Germany, for instance, or nearly everywhere in the world. But a company can apply to be allowed to put their waste into the river. And this is a very interesting thing to have in mind. And if we would have this crime of ecocide, this practice of companies being allowed to do some certain things would be altered as well. So a couple of words from my side of the broader ways we think that this crime of ecocide is going to work, and why we are so sure that this is a very important thing that we are doing here. And this campaign is very important. And your support, of course, is very important.
I actually think there could be another question for you, Wolf. Not sure if you've answered it kind of indirectly, but I'm just going to ask. Is any plan for the German team to work on a domestic proposal of ecocide law in the future?
Well, we are in talks with politicians and experts, lawyers and universities, and we will put some thoughts into this. Yeah, it is an interesting way for the German team. I don't know if we will do this year. As I said, we are focusing on the European level at the moment, but it might even be this year that we will have some answers to that. Yeah, thanks.
I think you kind of answered the question about human rights, right? About those conventions and treaties we have. Because someone is asking, what about human rights? All ratified conventions must be used considering the new human rights of healthy environment. They are ratified, they can be used. Of course, they can be used, but the problem we have is they do not include any criminal offenses. We only have 4 core crimes in international law, and ecocide would be the 5th one. And only then we could actually prosecute someone for damaging the environment, not with those human rights instruments. I hope that answers your question a bit.
Actually, I promised to put some links into the chat, but I don't. I'm not able to do this. I'm on the cell phone, and it's answering questions here and letting people in and putting links into the chat is too much for me at the moment. But we will send an email to everyone that applied. Still people applying, I see. So we will send an email to everybody, including the links that we think are important. Maybe even a couple of links to current press releases that are interesting. And Luise, may I ask you, could we put your presentation into that email as well?
Of course, no problem.
Wonderful. I'm sure lots of people would love to have your slides. Wonderful. So this is going to be our service offer for all of you. We will send you an email with the slides and a couple of links. And well, we hope that that we will welcome you again in 14 days when the next webinar is online. And we will send you the link. You don't have to apply again. We will send everybody that has applied already the link for the upcoming event as well. So we hope for your active participation for the next webinar. Very interesting from the view of an Indian lawyer and expert. And yeah, we will look very much forward to this next webinar. So any last questions? We've got a couple of minutes left Please feel free to just unmute yourself, ask the question. I look into the chat. There's an interesting question. The rights of nature approach. Yeah, this is a very interesting other approach of altering the law on highest level. In a way, we see the rights of nature as the other side of the coin to ecocide law. So the definition that Luise talked about, you may have noticed that there is no word of human rights being violated there. So it only speaks of harm to nature. And of course, if you define something like this, behind that lies the belief that, of course, nature has rights on its own. So this crime of ecocide would not give rights to nature in itself, but it's behind the idea lies the thought that nature has rights. And very interesting is that this idea, rights of nature, has already entered the European region. A couple of weeks ago in Spain, there is a big lagoon that has been granted own rights. So this is the first area of nature in Europe that actually has been given rights on its own. So it's a very good question and a very interesting thing to be aware of. Thanks. So let's look in the chat again. Yes, Ma Minoa, that is the lagoon. Thank you for saying this in the chat. There was another question. There is no defined crime of ecocide at the moment. Yeah, at least not on international level. There are some countries that already have a domestic crime of ecocide. France, for instance, has one, and Belgium is about to imply ecocide in domestic law as well. So there are a couple of countries there where that is already the case. Interestingly, Russia has it as well in domestic law, and a couple of other states in Eastern Europe. But the very important thing is to have it in the Rome Statute, because only then would we have a global law of ecocide. And this is very important for business. Maybe I conclude with this fact. More and more businesses call for a crime of ecocide because they want global guardrails within they can do their business. And of course, business people are not stupid. They do know that they can only live and thrive in a living environment. And more and more businesses don't want to harm nature anymore. And some of them feel they are forced to, because if they don't, their competitors will do. So they more and more companies call for global guardrails that will give them the opportunity to do sustainable business without a competition of other companies that don't apply to those rules. So this is a very interesting movement as well more and more businesses calling for a global law of ecocide and global guardrails. And this international crime of ecocide provides these guardrails, because there is no other law that would immediately have effect on nearly all the world, because 123 countries are part of the Rome Statute. So it's not every country, but most of the countries. And in all those countries, then would there be the same law of ecocide. So there is no other way to have a global law that applies for so many countries. So this is a very important aspect of our campaign as well. And then maybe one last question regarding CETA. So we think that one important thing would be if there would be this law in place, companies couldn't do things in well, I'm looking for the English word von Handelsverträge. CETA is one of the big international Handelsverträge. Please forgive me not knowing my English word for this. But if we would have the crime of ecocide, of course that would apply in certain ways to those as well. So this is an interesting topic that we don't read commercial agreements, contracts, things. Yeah, a very interesting topic, and we are sure it would have effect at least on the ones to come, but in certain ways even to the ones that are already in place, because a company, for instance, couldn't blame a country for not granting certain rights to pollute if those things would be illegal within this crime of ecocide. Whereas at the moment a company could sue a state under certain circumstances for not allowing them to pollute. So this is maybe a first part to an answer to this important question. So there are still people coming in. Thanks for joining us, but I am sorry I have to say you are a little bit too late. You are at the end, but I already said we will provide an email with all the important links and with very good slides that Luise presented today. And we will send also the link to the recording that we will publish on our YouTube channel. So for everybody coming late, of course you have missed something very good, but you can watch it later on and see the slides. So maybe a last word from you, Luise.
Well, I just want to thank everyone so much for being here, especially you, Wolf, for hosting this. It was very, very nice and a very nice experience. I hope someone or all of you could learn something today, and I would be happy to see everyone again.